Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to do another rewatch video of Quantum Leap, Season 2, Episode 7, Thou Shalt Not. The episode's description reads as follows. Sam leaps into a rabbi to prevent his host's sister-in-law from falling for a sleazy author. The episode takes place on February 2nd, 1974, originally aired on November 15th, 1989. It was directed by Randy Roberts. He has 12 other directing credits to his name, including Chicago Hope, LA Law, and Early Edition. He died on December 15, 2014, at the age of 69. The episode was written by Donald P. Belzerio and Tammy Ader, who also wrote for the series Strong Medicine. That would be the Patricia Richardson series. Patricia Richardson having shown up in the last episode. See, it pretty much all connects. This episode is not without its problems, but it is a very good episode, boosted by some strong performances. I'll get into some of my problems as we go through the episode. Sam leaps into the middle of a Jewish ceremony known as the bar mitzvah. For those who are not familiar with that particular ceremony, I got this definition off of the jewishmuseum.org. A bar or bar mitzvah is a coming-of-age ceremony for Jewish boys and girls when they reach the age of 12 or 13. The ceremony marks the time when a boy or girl becomes an adult. This means that they are now responsible for their own actions and can decide for themselves how they would like to practice their Judaism. The one undergoing this particular ceremony today would be Karen, played by Lindsay Fisher, who has only appeared in 10 other projects, including 3 episodes of Roseanne. And it's really unfortunate that she didn't get more opportunities because she is really quite good in this episode. As we start, she looks quite miserable, and we cut away to her family, though we don't know who they are exactly yet, and only her mother looks happy. Her dad, named Joe, is played by James Sutroyas, and he has appearances in Chicago Hope, a regular on Pretender, and a regular on the series Dynasty. Her mother, Irene, is played by Terry Honar, and she has appearances in the movie Havoc, NYPD Blue, Without a Trace, and the series 6 Feet Under. In addition to that, she also has 5 directorial credits, including a movie that aired this year called Peeling the Stinky Onion. Sounds interesting. Sam smiles along until the person who's singing the song at the bar mitzvah turns to Sam and says, "Rabbi, new?" And I didn't quite catch what he meant by that. I'm pretty sure that the second word he spoke was a Jewish word that I'm unfamiliar with. Now, interesting to note that I myself am Jewish, or at least I have some Jewish heritage. The dad's side of my family was Jewish. Neither my mom nor my dad raised me religiously. So I am really Jewish in name only. But Corman is a very Jewish name. And I have absolutely no knowledge of Jewish heritage or practices, other than what I have just shared with you. And Sam is startled to realize that he himself is the rabbi. When we come back from the credits, Sam is mingling in what appears to be a party, which would seem to be the after party of the ceremony. People are dancing, Sam is being introduced to people, including Bert Glasserman, played by Russ Tamblyn. And I kind of wish they'd just cut this character completely out, but we'll get to discussing that a little bit later. Russ Tamblyn was in the original Twin Peaks series, as well as the revival, and also the movie, all as the same character. In addition to that, he shows up in Babylon 5, the movie Drive, and Django Unchained. The speaker, which I guess is another rabbi, I'm honestly not really even sure who this guy is. I can't really seem to locate him in the credits. I mean, I'm sure he's there, but I don't know who he is. But he calls attention to the guests and says that the Bosch family, Joe, Irene, and Karen, are all on the stage, and it's time for Rabbi Bosch, the Sam Beckett person that Sam leaped into, to join them on the stage to break bread. And of course, Sam has absolutely no idea what he's doing. But he's saved by Al at the 4-minute and 18-minute mark, who knows the exact words in Hebrew to say. And he knows this because his third wife, Ruthie, was Jewish. Now, this seems to be another example of Al hanging around in a church with no issue, just like in The Right Hand of God. Whereas in an upcoming episode, Al will have a very big time problem hanging around in a church. So once again, this is a contradiction to something we will later see. After Sam finishes his duties, they begin to dance, which my best guess is that this dance and the song is known as the Hora, which Al's Place, which is a Quantum Leap website that a friend of mine recently rediscovered for me. That would be Stacy, now Wilcox, because she just got married. Congratulations, by the way. The Hora is described as a lively traditional Jewish dance, usually performed at weddings, and the celebratory meal after a bar or bar mitzvah. After the dance, we see Joe with Burt Glasserman, who's talking to him about not having seen him at the beach house recently. Alright, so I'm not even going to wait for this. I'm going to talk about this now. Burt Glasserman turns out to be an author. He's the villain of this piece. He eventually ends up seducing Irene, and he's currently doing this for research so that he can write a book about women in pain. And he's choosing people that he seems to know as targets. He seems to know Joe. They seem familiar with each other. He's hanging out at this church. And later on, it'll be revealed that he had an affair with someone else at the same church, presumably for the same reason. If you're this type of guy, you're the type of scuzzbucket that's going to take advantage of women, so in the guise of writing a book, a research book about women in pain, you're going to do this with people you know, people you hang out with, people whose church you attend. It would seem to me like you would pick a location with people that you don't necessarily know, that you're not as familiar with, so that when the book comes out and the truth is revealed, you're not getting beaten to a pulp. At the very least, Joe knows about the guy's beach house. When the book comes out and he happens to notice that his ex-wife is in there, he can easily track the guy down and either murder the guy or at the very least beat the ever-loving crap out of him. I'm honestly surprised that this hasn't happened already, though I don't know the content of his other books exactly. I don't have a problem with the actor. The actor is fine. I do have a problem with this character, and I kind of wish they cut him out and found a different way to tell this story without him. Anyway, in this scene, Sam and Irene wander over into this conversation. They note that Karen is dating with a boy, Michael Kornblum. Irene asks Joe to dance, and he refuses, gently of course. And then Bert ends up dancing with her. Sam, after they depart, says, "Hey, you should have danced with her." And then Joe says, "Is that advice from my rabbi or my brother? Because I don't need advice from either one." And Sam seems confused by his attitude. And, alright, I'm not going to wait on this either. I'm going to talk about Joe. Joe reminds me of the Kay Callahan character in the Americanization of Machko, in that they are both reactions to grief. The episode takes quite a long time telling us this, but both Irene and Joe lost a son. In response, Joe has basically walled himself off. He's walled himself off from his wife. He's walled himself off from his daughter. He's made himself emotionally unavailable. He has shut down. In addition to walling off his emotions, he's expressing his grief in anger. He's not talking about his emotions. He's burying them. And it's coming out being expressed through anger towards Karen, towards his wife. In addition to that, he's sort of resenting his wife because she's reacting to grief in a different way. For instance, later we find that she vacuums Danny, their son's old room, and he doesn't understand why. He doesn't understand why she is still cooking his favorite meals. He's dead. So what is she doing? He does not understand, and he's resentful because of that. The funny thing about this series is that we have to get attached to and like and care about the characters in a very short amount of time. We got to get introduced to them, learn whatever their particular issues are, what's going to happen to them, what their story is, and we have to care about them in a very short amount of time. And once the episode is done, more than likely we are never going to see them again. Characters like Joe and the Kay Callahan character in the Americanization of Machko, they're difficult to love because we're not exactly seeing them at their best. This is probably Joe's lowest point in his life, as he's completely shut down as a human being, as I've already expressed. It's hard for us to wrap our arms around him, to care about him, because we see him being awful to his wife and to his daughter. So it's hard to humanize the guy until much, much later in the episode. In the meantime, the characters that we have to grow to care about are his wife and his daughter Karen. Because Joe is not only emotionally distant from his wife and his daughter, he's also emotionally distant from us. Meanwhile, we see three women discussing Burke Lasserman, one of them being Cheryl, played by Jill Jacobson. In addition to her appearance here, she also appeared in 2 episodes of Newhart, Who's the Boss?, Murphy Brown, an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and the aforementioned series Strong Medicine. She is still acting to this day. As the women discuss Bert, Shirley seems pretty uncomfortable, and eventually asks the rabbi, Sam, to sit down. The 2 other women make a hasty retreat, and it seems almost like they're setting them up or something. It's kinda odd. She eventually says that she needs to talk to him. They make arrangements to do so, and then she quickly takes off. Sam eventually asks Al, "Why am I here?" And as it turns out, he's here for Irene, because she's going to have an affair. In the year 5734, which is a year that confuses Al a little bit, before he realizes that happens to be Jewish years. Anyway, in that year, Irene is going to have an affair. This is going to take place in 36 hours. She's going to have that affair, her husband is going to find out, and it's going to destroy the marriage. Though, as we go along, their marriage is already pretty thoroughly on the rocks. And apparently Karen never gets over it. Not that this is unusual or anything, but Ziggy misses a huge piece of information here that surely would have been helpful during this leap. For instance, the fact that their son is dead. That definitely changes the dynamics of everything that is going on. After the ceremony is home, or over rather, Sam Beckett is home with Karen and Joe. It seems like the next morning or something like that. Karen is looking at her presents, which includes an 8-track tape and a necklace of some kind that Michael Kornblum got her. Sam speculates that Michael must really like her, and that's my diagnosis as well. Karen tries to get the attention of her dad, bringing attention to the necklace, but he gets tripped up on the whole Michael Kornblow thing. I probably screwed up that name, but whatever. Kornblum. The name is Kornblum, not Kornblow. Anyway, he gets tripped up on the whole Michael Kornblum thing because this used to be the little brother of one of Danny's friends. Well, he's still the little brother of the big brother who was friends with Danny. He doesn't mention Danny by name. He just mentions the older brother and asks if she ever sees him anymore. And Karen points out that he's away in Yale. And Joe distractedly says, "Oh, that's right. He was going to Yale too." Sam watches this scene, and honestly, I think he should be getting more information from this than he does. The usually perceptive Sam is not really that perceptive in this episode. Anyway, Joe says he needs to go to the gas station. He wants to beat the crowd, because this is the 1970s and the gas shortage. Karen wants to go with him, but Joe is like, "Why would you want to do that?" "Oh, I don't know, knucklehead. Maybe it's so she can spend a little bit of time with you." Instead of Karen going, Sam Beckett goes with him, which seems to be a good opportunity to get some more information about what's going on here. At the gas station, Sam speculates that they are 9 cars back, and Joe seems unconcerned about that. He says, it was a good excuse to get out of the house anyway. And Sam is all like, why would you want to get out of the house? Trying to glean some more information about exactly what's going on here. And Joe doesn't really answer the question. He brings up the basketball game, and Sam says he didn't see it, which, according to Joe, would be a first time, because apparently the person he leaped into is a big time fan of this team. And by the way, this is the most likable that Joe is in this episode, this scene here, which leads Joe to remembering their father, the times that they would go to basketball games together. And he says, that's what life is all about, bringing your son to a basketball game. Sam asks him, do you ever take Karen? And Joe says, no, it's not the same. And then Sam asks, what about Irene? And Joe says, we used to, but no longer. In fact, we don't do much of anything anymore. Joe goes on to say that for the first time in 22 years, he's been considering having an affair. And then the scene just sort of ends. Alright, so I like this scene. I don't like how it ends. I think it should keep going. First of all, how many men just come out and say, I'm thinking about having an affair to their brothers? I mean, maybe this happens, I don't know. But usually, when you're going to have an affair, or you're thinking about having an affair, there's a person in the picture. You're not just, I'm thinking about having an affair without anybody, present to do that with, if you know what I mean. Usually there's a temptation, a specific person. We get no evidence of that person whatsoever with Joe. That's actually the least of my problems. Sam doesn't ask any follow-up questions here. Here's another chance to get more of an idea of what's going on here. I mean, I'm not sure that Sam would get the answers that he's looking for, but he could at least try. He just kind of stares at Joe and says nothing, and then we cut to the next scene, which is Al and Sam discussing the situation. How about a comment like, are things really that bad? Keep the guy talking, get more information, figure things out. Sam seems much more passive here than usual, and a lot less perceptive than he normally is. And this seems to me a writer's conceit. Like, they are keeping this reveal until they want to reveal it, for much longer into the episode. But it's not really in character for Sam Beckett. Anyway, in the next scene, Al and Sam talk, and Al tries to defend the idea of sleeping with other people outside of your marriage. And Sam says that fidelity is the backbone of any good relationship. But he tells Al that he doesn't think he would understand that. And Al says, hey, all of my relationships have been good. It's been my marriages that have been crap. Well, we already know you're cheating on Tina. You slept with several women during the course of this series already that we know about. So I'm not particularly persuaded by your comments here, Al. But I do have a theory about the guy that I believe I'm going to share during the season finale of this season, when we get to the big Al Calbici episode. Irene interrupts this conversation, and naturally wonders who Sam is talking to. And of course, Sam, being a rabbi, says that he's praying. Hey, that's a mighty convenient excuse. Maybe he should be rabbis more often. Sam ends up playing Scrabble with Karen, and tries out the word sushi. But Karen isn't letting him get away with it, because she doesn't recognize the word. And he ends up settling for a much lesser word, which I believe was for like 6 points. Sam, come on, why don't you just whip out your phone and Google it and prove it? Prove to Karen that that's a word. Oh, right. This is the 1970s, before Google, before cell phones. Okay, well, there's some dictionaries around here. You can't let her get away with this, Sam. But I guess he's gonna. Sam ends up taking out a guitar and starts to play, which upsets Karen. Because as it turns out, it was Danny's guitar, and Sam still doesn't really know who Danny is. Though by this point, I think he should have gathered that information. He had opportunities to do so, but hasn't as of yet. We cut to dinner, where Karen is clearly a little bit down. When asked about it, Sam speaks up and says that it's his fault, because he wanted to play Danny's guitar, which earns him a look from Joe. And eventually Irene says, well, maybe somebody should play it. And Joe speaks up, indicating he's not interested in having this discussion. And Irene says it's been a year since their son's death. Irene wants to deal with the fact that their son is dead, head on. And Joe doesn't want to deal with it at all. And this is where we finally get to the heart of the matter of what's really going on here. And I respect the intention of what the writers were doing here, even if making Sam be a little less observant than he usually is to do it isn't the greatest way to go about it. Irene brings up the headstone, and Joe doesn't want to talk about it. Irene presses, and Joe gets angry. Angry enough that it scares Karen away from the table. It either scares her or upsets her, or both. This is when Sam finally realizes what's going on here. This is a family dealing with grief, except that they're not dealing with it at all. Nobody wants to talk about it. And Sam makes up an excuse to stay the night, saying his house is being fumigated. Later, Irene is making the bed in Danny's old room for Sam to sleep in. They get into a conversation about Danny, about a trip that he wanted to go on, how she didn't want him to go on it, but she basically charmed his way into it. And that was the very trip in which he died on. She wonders, was he thinking about her when he died? Did he call for her? That's what keeps her up at night. She starts crying, and Sam hugs her. And he says, he loved you, Irene. They almost end up kissing, and then stop. They awkwardly part ways. And Sam comes to the conclusion that the person that she was having the one-night stand with was himself. Now, why did that almost happen? Well, I'll tell you. She was looking for emotional comfort. She was looking for any emotional support whatsoever. The type of support that she is not getting from her husband, who's completely walled himself off. So she's looking for it elsewhere. It's why she almost kissed Sam, and why she ends up almost doing what she does with Bert Glasserman later in the episode. We cut to Sam and Al discussing the situation, and Al simply suggests, hey, you're Irene's future lover, so don't do it, and promise to God that you won't do it in the future, and that should do the trick. You should be able to leave now. Okay, you guys are both stupid. Of course this wasn't gonna work. That doesn't really solve the problem. Once Sam leaps out, he has no control over the situation. And as it turns out, Sam isn't even the one that she was having the affair with, but it doesn't matter. Unless you deal with the problem that led to the affair, the affair isn't the main problem. It's a symptom of the problem. And the main problem is, this is a family that's not dealing with their grief. And Sam has to get that family to do so. Which, this reminds me of Kamikaze Kid. Stop an abusive situation. How do you go about doing that? How do you go about doing this? There's no clear-cut solution to this. Sam ends up asking the question, is Irene falling in love with me? And Al doesn't know. Al also doesn't think it's that simple. He thinks it's more about falling in need with him. What she needs is for Sam to keep the family together, to get her back to the man that she loves in Joe. I'm not sure I entirely agree with Al's take here, but it's somewhat close to what I think is going on. Al says he didn't realize how much family meant until Ruthie was gone, and Sam says he knows what he means. Sam says sometimes he wishes he could go home, but he can't, and all he has is what he can remember, which isn't a whole lot. And Al says to him, then make this your family. In the here and now, this is your family, so don't let it fall apart. And those are some wise words of advice from Al. After spending the better part of an episode not exactly having the greatest takes on things, we cut to what I believe to be the church. They're having some kind of event or cleaning up after an event. Karen is there with Irene, and eventually Irene ends up talking to Bert. And Bert is continuing to work his magic, or lack thereof. Okay, Bert, if you would kindly F off, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. We pan over to Sam and Karen, and Sam says, hey, it looks like your mother's enjoying herself. Well, yeah, Sam, but maybe that's not such a good thing. And from my perspective, she doesn't really look like she was enjoying that conversation in the first place, but whatever. Karen says, well, at least one of us is. And Sam says to her, hey, this is a time where your mother needs your support. And Karen points out, Isn't that what husbands are for? Well, yeah, sure, but she could also use it from you, Karen. Shirley ends up finding Sam, and they have their little conversation that they were going to have earlier. And eventually it's revealed that Shirley had an affair with Bert Glasserman, and she asks the rabbi what she should do. And Sam's response is, I think we should set up another appointment. And her reaction is understandable. Huh? You know what? That's also my reaction. What the heck kind of response is that, Sam? Back inside, Sam helps Irene with something, and Irene says that she would like to thank him for last night. And Sam gets spooked and says, Last night? Yes, thank you for listening. And Sam responds, Well, hey, what are rabbis for? And Irene points out that she is not just her rabbi, and Sam gets all flustered, but Irene means he is also her brother-in-law. Sam ends up suggesting that the two of them, Joe and Irene, go away together on vacation. Sam goes even further to say that, hey, maybe they should go this weekend, and Sam will watch Karen. And you know, Karen is actually pretty much old enough to watch herself, so she doesn't even need Sam to watch her, but nevertheless. Joe returns home looking despondent. Irene and Sam come down the stairs with bags packed, saying, Hey, we're going on vacation. Joe is less than thrilled. He says, Well, I wish you'd talk to me because I have work to do. Well, you can do it up there. I don't wanna. Yes, Joe continues to be an absolute joy in this episode. They end up getting into an argument where Sam tries to explain exactly what this is all about. But Joe is refusing to listen, and Irene says, Listen to David. Hey, by the way, the character's name is David, so he can't be all bad. We Daves, or Davids, have to stick together. I don't think I've mentioned that to this point, but that is what his name is. And Joe comes back with, Oh, David understands, huh? Well, why didn't you go and marry him then? And Irene says, Well, maybe I should have. Irene leaves. Joe and David continue to try to fight. Rather, Sam, in David's body, or in David's place, rather, because it's not his body. Continue to argue, but Joe isn't having it, and he takes off. And then Karen, who's been listening to this, says, I wish you had married my mom, too. And Sam says, Don't say that. For one thing, Karen, if that had happened, you likely would not exist. Someone else would exist in your place. But maybe that isn't a deal breaker with you. She asks, Why doesn't my dad love me? And Sam replies, He does. But right now, he needs you to love him just as much. We're going to file that away under more useless advice from Sam Beckett for this episode. I don't know what to tell Karen in this situation, but then again, I'm not Sam Beckett trying to fix this situation. So there's that. He does end up making Karen feel better before she goes off to bed by making her laugh. Al appears, and he asks, How's it going, Sam? With a bearing that very much suggests he knows very well things are not going very well. And this is another little showcase for how subtly great Dean Stockwell is. He's got the physical acting down, he's rubbing his face, a mannerism that suggests that he's upset by what he's just witnessed. He's great. He's great as the comic sidekick, but he's also greater in these more dramatic moments. And he has an even better showcase in the next episode. Sam ends up revealing that, or rather Al ends up revealing, that Bert Glasserman wrote a book about women in pain, which I've already discussed. And of course, Karen, or rather Irene, was a chapter in that book. Something makes Sam realize that Irene going to the beach house might result in her hooking up with Bert Glasserman. So off screen, he ends up asking Karen for directions to the beach house, which Joe gets wind of thanks to Karen. But he gets the wrong idea. We cut to Karen at the beach house by herself, and in the shadows lurks Bert Glasserman. Didn't I tell you to F off? Well, I guess you're not going to listen to me. Anyway, we have a scene where they're cozying up on the couch. Bert is selling her on the pain that he does not experience because he is not a widower at all like he's claiming to be. Bert and Irene end up making out. Sam ends up interrupting them, which is when the truth comes to light. This does not make Irene happy, and Bert ends up finally effing off. Supporting Irene in this moment, Sam hugs her, and this is when Joe happens upon the scene. and makes the wrong conclusion. Which, come on, they were just hugging, which could have happened for any number of reasons. Like, I wouldn't see somebody hugging and immediately jump to the fact that they're having an affair. But whatever. Oh, and then also, there's the fact that Sam tried to get you on this trip in the first place. But this doesn't have to make any sense, because Joe is just looking for reasons to be mad at Irene. So he's taking this out of context, subconsciously on purpose, so he can be mad at her. Sam chases after him. Joe and Sam get into a heated discussion, which leads to Joe punching Sam in the face. And Al thinks this is the greatest thing ever, because it means he still loves Irene, and he suggests letting him do it again. And so Sam takes Al's advice, and takes one for the team, in the jaw. Irene happens upon this scene, and then they finally end up talking about their grief. Honestly, for real. Having an honest-to-God conversation about how they feel about their son being gone. Joe is finally breaking down and crying, finally dealing with the pain that he's been trying to push away. Al thinks it's time to leap because Sam accomplished his mission, but Sam is not doing so, and Sam doesn't think his mission is quite complete. We cut to the ceremony of putting up the headstone for Danny. Al's place was once again helpful in helping me describe the scene, in the sense that this is the setting of the headstone ceremony, which usually is a custom for friends and family a year after the person dies. So this is actually happening roughly around the time that it's supposed to. There's a beautiful song playing in the background, which is just absolutely lovely, and a lovely way to end the episode. It's called The Mourner's Kaddish. Joe ends up walking off to be by himself, and Sam goes to his side and says that Karen needs him, and that he should go to her. Joe says he doesn't know if he can, and Sam points out that she needs him, and she quietly walks over to her. She looks up at him, and he parts his hands, as in to suggest that it's time for a hug. She laughs and cries, and the two of them embrace. Their relationship repaired, and Sam leaps. Beautiful episode, beautiful finish. I have one question though. How long was Sam there for after Joe and Irene patched things up? I'm assuming that the whole headstone thing, which they were not dealing with before, takes a little bit of time to set up. So how long was Sam waiting around to finally complete his mission? It's a minor quibble and doesn't really affect the episode any, but it is a matter of curiosity for me. Episodes like Good Morning Peoria, which was the aforementioned episode, might be more fun to watch, but these are the types of episodes that I absolutely live for, because they give me something to talk about. And despite my problems, which I discussed throughout the episode, I still think that this was a great, dramatic episode, with good performances all the way around. That's all I have for this episode. Next week, when I talk about this series, we will be discussing the episode Jimmy, another absolute classic of the series, and I personally can't wait. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can join my Corman Productions Facebook page. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. You can buy something from the Corman Productions store on Zazzle. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.